Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me here today. We are here for the introduction to Topaz Adjust. Topaz Adjust is the most popular plugin here at Topaz and is one of the easiest ways to get your image to pop. And I'm talking really pop, and it's a very quick process. Just a one-click preset will usually do it. And then if you want to actually customize the effect from there, which I like to do personally, you can do so with all of the adjustment sliders. So first I'm going to go over just a few of our before and after images here for you. They're anywhere from really subtle adjustments to more vibrant adjustments. So here is this city image to start off with. I'm just going to, here's the beginning image. This next image here is just with a little bit of a specify preset, and then this is the exact same specify preset, except it is processing the details separately from the adjustments, and I'll show you how to do that. That really takes some of that grunge look down if you're looking for more of those colors without actually getting all that detail and gritty look. We can easily do that within Adjust. So again, here's before, then the same preset after is here. You can tell a lot of those details go down just a little bit. Let's look at some others. This image is a nice image. It's kind of, this is the before, and it's pretty, but there's nothing really exciting happening. You can really pop up these type of colors within a more mild colored image like this just by one preset and Adjust. I was able to pull this out pretty quick. Okay. This is an underwater image. It's actually through a fish tank, but here is the before, and with one preset I was able to not only enhance the color and the contrast, but also really clear up all of that film that you can see through the water. It really enhanced this underwater image. Let's see here. Here is a before image of this Italian town here, and afterwards. Now this is actually a good thing to look at. If you notice over here on the right on my layers palette within Photoshop, my opacity for this particular level is 73%. Now the image processed out of Adjust was actually this image right here. We're now at 100%. It was a little too vibrant for me, a little too much going on. So I just took my opacity level down, and it started to mix those two layers together. So if you ever find that you're taking an image out of Adjust, it's way too strong for you and you thought it was perfect, you don't necessarily need to go back in. You can just change that opacity level. And so instead of being really dramatic, it's more subtle and much more natural looking. I thought this one just worked great because this was the before image, and then this is our vibrance preset, very quick preset image, and a lot of color and detail came out in it. Again, if this is too strong, you can take that opacity level down just to get a little bit of pop of color and detail. Again, this is the same type of thing, the vibrance preset. Here's before. Here's after. So really I just want to get across that it's really simple to get these colors and detail to really pop in your image in a very real way. It can be very subtle, it can be very dramatic, it can be very natural, it can be more artistic, all sorts of different things happening within Adjust. So let's look at a couple more. I'm going to kind of scroll down here. This is a great image because here is the before, taken on a cruise ship out on the deck. It's very dark, and it became very, all these vibrant colors kind of disappeared. And it was very simple to go in, move a couple sliders around, and get this image, and things started to pop out. And that's what Adjust is really known for, to really stretch those highlights and shadow areas without actually losing any detail. All right, let's look at a couple more. Here's before and after. I want to show you a painting one, if I can get to it. Here we go. This is more of a, I believe this is the Venice painting preset. Here's before and after. And I'll show you how to kind of get this look in Adjust. It's very cool, very pretty, and you can really stretch those colors in there as well. Let's look at a couple others. We'll get back to these. I'll show you this though. Here's before. Again, very hazy, not a lot of color coming through. This is one preset. Was able to pop those clouds out, get some color in the mountains or the cliffs here, and really bring your attention to the sailboat. Let's go ahead and jump on into the program now. Let me go back to this city image, and that's a really good one to start off with. So I'm going to get rid of, actually I'm just going to go to, okay, so this is just a background copy of my background. Let me get rid of that and show you how I create that. I always suggest using a background layer as opposed to your actual background so you can play with the blending modes of Adjust, because again, sometimes it does come out way too strong and it just doesn't work. So the way that I like to make a background copy is either by pressing Command or Control J, or simply clicking on the layer, dragging it down to this little square and saying OK, and it'll just pop that little background layer up. Alright, so then you just go up into Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust 4, and usually the first thing you'll see is some sort of adjustment applied to your image that you just brought in, especially if you've been working with Adjust before. That's just the previous or the last used settings that are being applied to your image. It's really good if you're working on a batch of images, and so that's a really nice feature, but sometimes you don't want it. All you have to do is come to this lower right and press Reset All. If you're unfamiliar with Topaz Adjust, over here on the left side we have our preset panel. Our preset preview is going to be up here, and as you scroll over these presets, you'll notice that that preset preview changes. Gives you a nice little idea of what to expect, different colors that are going to be pulled out, and if you find something that you think you might like within it, all you have to do is click on it and it will be applied to your main preview. If you want less of a processing time when you're opening up your Topaz Adjust, I know some users have hundreds of presets within their Adjust, and then it takes a while to actually open the program up. So a little trick, hide this preset preview like that, and then the presets will not process whenever they are taken into, when you're opening up Adjust. That's just a little trick that I like to tell people. If you have tons of presets, that will help your processing time when you're opening. Okay, so I'm going to show that again. Again, you can just press on a preset and it will be applied to your main image over here on your preview. At the bottom of your preset panel you have Save, Delete, Import, and Export. Those are all for your user-made presets. So this is a user-made preset of mine called Stan Fam. It's my brother Stan's family that I used for a batch of images, so I created a preset for it. So now I can delete that if I wanted to. If I created another preset, let's see, something like this, and I really liked it, I can go to Save, and it'll ask me all of this information, and then I press OK, and it'll be saved back into my preset panel. Alright, so in the menu button here we have the ability to enter your key. You can also check out some of the Topaz Adjust gallery. This is where your user's guide is too. If you ever have any questions, you want to learn more about it, what I'm going over here today, definitely download this user guide. It's already on your computer. It's just a PDF file already in the plugin. Okay, so over here on the in the main panel we have our original and preview options. You can click to your original by using this tab up here. It'll go back to your original, and then click onto your preview. You can also go back and forth by hitting your space bar or your upper left, or I'm sorry, your left mouse button. On the right panel over here we have our preview navigator. So as you go into your image and zoom in, you'll notice that this little red box gets smaller, and that's what you're looking at within your preview. Then you can move it around, etc., etc. So you can zoom out. This fit button will allow you to fit the entire image within your preview window, and then the 1-to-1 takes you to 100%. Let's go back to fit. Okay, below that we have undo, redo, and snap. snap is really cool. So let's say I'm to this point right here and I think it might be what I want to do with my image, but I'm not sure, and I don't want to save a preset, but I don't want to write down all of these adjustments that I just spent 5 minutes working on. You can click a little picture by clicking your snap button and then continue working. So let's continue working. And let's say I get to this point and I think, oh, well, maybe this is what I really wanted. I can click another snapshot, and then you can continue doing all of this. You can take up to 99 snapshots with each image, and then you can toggle back and forth between all of your snapshots by going to this previous and next button. And you'll notice that all of these sliders actually move, so when you finally get to what exactly you want, you can just press OK and process it back or save it as a preset. It's pretty cool. Okay, so down here in your adjustment panel you have exposure, details, color, and noise, and that is what Adjust works with, except it does it in quite a different way than other programs. It does it adaptively with its exposure and color, and you can really pull certain things out of the program or out of the image very easily. So I'm going to go over that with you here in just a moment. Down here on the bottom of this panel is going to be Reset All, which again will reset you back to your original image, and the I Feel Lucky button. This is a great button if you take an image in. You can just start pressing this, and you'll start pulling these really creative ideas, or these really creative adjustments out of the program. It just automatically changes all of these sliders around. So even if, say I bring this city image in and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with it, I can just keep pressing I Feel Lucky and see if something pops up that I like or I'm inspired by, and then just go from there. So it could be a really fun way to work whenever you're feeling uninspired, I guess. All right, and then you have your cancel button and your OK button to process it back into your host program. Now, Adjust is going to be, I see some questions coming through about what host programs it works in. It works in Photoshop, Photoshop Elements, and I believe it's Photoshop Elements 6 through 9, and then Photoshop CS3 through CS5. It's also compatible with Lightroom, Aperture, and iPhoto. All of our programs are compatible with all of those except for Remask, which needs layers capability, so it's only compatible with Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. All right, let's move on. Let's go ahead and reset all, and let's work on the city image. So the first thing I like to do, my particular workflow, is to come over here into my presets panel and just click on the first one, which is exposure correction, which is great for some subtle adjustments for just pulling a little bit out. And I honestly just like to go down and watch my image transform with each preset and just see which one is catching my attention. Once you start to gravitate towards certain presets, you'll know which ones you're after, but if you have no idea what you want to do with the image, the presets are a really great place to start. So with this particular image, I know I want to pull out, here's the before, I know I want to pull out all of these like red tones and blue tones and yellow. I see them in there, they're just not popping at all. So from previous experience, I know that I can just go down here to Specify, which is a really popular preset because it pulls out all of these colors out of really muted color palettes. So here's before and here's after. So I'm pretty happy with what the color is doing, but I'm not so happy with some other things, and I'll tell you which ones. First, I'm starting to see a halo around my city, and I don't want that. The second thing I see is I'm starting to see a lot of noise in my sky, and I'm starting to see this really gritty look in my city. So here's before, here's after. It's really strong. I want to tone it down. So I'm going to tell you two tricks before we actually get into all of the different sliders. First trick is this little checkbox right here, process details independent of exposure. Watch what happens when I click that. Okay, so I'll unclick it again. This is the original Specify preset. Okay, I have all of these really stretched out details a lot of highlights going in everywhere within all of the texture. It's very texturized, very gritty, but I still have that really nice color. Now I'm going to click on Process Details Independent of Exposure. It keeps that really nice, pretty color coming through, but it takes away that overly processed type of look. So, depending upon what you want for your image, that is a little trick that I like to use, especially with these really heavy presets like Specify and Psychedelic and things that are really going overboard with the popping, if you will. So, my other little trick here to get rid of some of these halos is this region slider. You can take your region slider, let me take it all the way up so you start to see that halo right next to the buildings here. It's especially apparent whenever we do the process without independent of exposure. So we see that bright halo. If you want to keep that gritty look but still don't want that want the halo, you can just take this region slider down and just kind of work with it as it goes down. And it is going to change the way the rest of your image is exposed, so you just have to decide what you like for that image. But that is one way to get rid of those halos, is to start out at a preset that might have those halos a little bit and then work your way down on that region slider, and you'll see that they start to disappear and you get a much more natural transition between the edges of your subject and the sky or whatever it's going against where those halos start to appear. All right, so that's a couple tricks. Let's go over what all of these sliders mean. The first one we have here is exposure. Adaptive exposure is going to it corrects the exposure of your image by working on a certain technology that balances the different tonal values within the region it's working on. So this adaptive exposure works in conjunction with the region slider, and so let's just leave our adaptive exposure at 0.50. We're not moving that at all, and just moving the region slider will completely change that exposure. And now if my region slider is at 41 and it stays there, it's going to completely change here as well. So they work in conjunction with one another. So what it's doing, the adaptive exposure is working in whatever region, however many regions you've separated the image into, is however that adaptive exposure is working. Now this is a really difficult thing to understand without seeing a visual, so I'm going to get out of here and show you kind of what I mean. But remember these two sliders. We have adaptive exposure and then the regions, which goes from 1 to 50. Let me cancel out of this real quick and show you kind of how the regions work together. So if this is my original image right here, this image of this field with the little house peeking up here, that I take into Adjust, the default of my regions is going to be 4. Okay, that's the default when you bring it in, or when you press Reset All, it's a default of 4. A region setting of 4 will separate your image like this. What it will do is we'll take the longest side of your image, which for this one is the horizontal side, and it will separate it by whatever value you have in your region slider. Since it's 4, we now have 4 different columns here. At that point, the program then separates your image by squares for the rest of it. So we have 12 squares and 4 horizontal rectangles. That's what it would look like with a region setting of 4. And your image would look something like this at adaptive exposure 0.5. Okay? Now with the adaptive exposure staying at 0.5, if I change my regions to 40, oops, I went one too many, then my regions will be separated like this. So there's 40 columns across, and then it's separated into squares from there, and again the final image will look like this. So dependent, and this is still exposure 0.5, so dependent upon your regions, it's very important and works in conjunction with it, and that's how you can get some really interesting looks and how that kind of pseudo HDR look starts to come out the higher you go with your regions, because it really starts to locally expose the image on a very local manner, very small areas. It's very interesting. I'll send a link that explains it much better than I just did, but I just wanted you guys to see a visual. Let's get back into Adjust. Let's grab this image. This is a good image to take in. Okay. So contrast is going to be a much more, it's going to be kind of just a normal contrast slider. Brightness, same thing. It's going to just brighten or take out the brightness of your image. The highlights, it's going to protect your highlights a little bit more, so it's going to try not to blow out those highlights so much, so there's still a little bit of value in there, so it'll try to protect them. That's what we call it. It's also protecting your shadows. So as you go up in your shadow protection, your shadows begin to become a little bit less dark, less contrasty, and you have to be a little bit careful with that because it does become hazy in some images, but that's what those two are. Okay, moving on to the detail slider. You have your strength, which is just the overall detail enhancement that's applied to the whole image. So as you go up, you can see there's a very significant detail enhancement. You can go really crazy with this particular one. It gets very detailed. You can also take it the other direction, which is how some of those paintings begin to be applied. So you can really create different types of photo art in Adjust as well as just doing normal adjustments. The boost works in conjunction with your strength slider. What the boost does is boost up the smaller details that the strength slider really didn't affect. So if you just boost up your boost slider, it's going to get into the nitty-gritty details that really aren't affected by that strength slider. So again, the boost slider, it works in conjunction with your strength slider. The threshold slider is going to, as you move it up, it allows for more of the image elements to actually be considered details. So let's take a look at that. So if I take my strength up to about 2-ish, and I move my threshold, it's going to, watch this line right here across the tree line. It's very interesting how it works. So it starts to, as you move it up, larger areas or larger edges are starting to be considered details, and it will sharpen those up as well. So that's a really nice little trick to know within this as well. The radius, the larger the detail radius is, the larger the size of the detail enhancement. So as we move that up, it starts to get pretty big details. As you move it down, it'll start to shrink those. So it's pretty obvious in this image as well. Sharpen is, this is just a quick sharpener. It's not really a de-blur type of thing, but more of just your normal type of sharpener. So as we go up, you can see that it starts to really sharpen up those trees, all the areas within the iceberg here. Now the process detail is independent of exposure. Again, what it does is it separates the details from the exposure. That's what we're doing right now. If we uncheck that, it's a completely different feel. So it really is something to play around with when you're working with your image. Usually it helps to eliminate any detail enhancement that's going on within your sky that becomes a little gritty, or really edge enhancements that you might not want. You want to tone it down. Checking that usually helps. Okay, in your color tab, you have adaptive saturation, regions, saturation boost, and hue. Adaptive saturation kind of works the way the exposure, adaptive exposure works. It works in conjunctions with the region slider below it, and it works on just the area, however many regions you've applied to your image. So it really is dependent upon it. It can be very subtle. I really like the adaptive saturation. It can be pretty dramatic, and it changes with your regions. So watch this area on the mountain right here. So when the regions is down here, it's a little bit more of this bluish tone. It really doesn't really stand out, and as you move that region slider up, completely changes the highlights, the feeling of your image. So it really, again, depends on what you're looking for in your image. The saturation slider is your normal type of saturation slider. It just does the overall saturation. And then the saturation boost is same idea as the details. It saturates the weaker colors within your image. So as you work on this, it's going to be those weaker colors that start to come out. So you can really play around with which areas of your image that you really want to saturate, which ones you want to bring out, etc., etc. Okay, and then we have our noise slider. That's going to be the last one. You're not going to be able to move any of these noise sliders without going above 50%. The reason being is unless you're really at 100%, it's not going to allow you to really see the noise that's actually in your image. You're just going to see some preview noise. So here we have, we're at 100% now, and we start to see what's really going on in these clouds. It's not very pretty. So this is something where your noise suppression would come in handy, or you could take down the details and the color and work with that separately. Let's do this first. Okay, that helps a lot just by doing the process details independent of exposure. Then you have your regular noise suppression. Okay, starts to make things really smooth it out, and with the amount it is, it starts to do some interesting shapes in this image. And then let's go to fit, see how it's affecting everything. This is a really nice smoothing technique as well if you're working with trying to create painting. I guess that was silly of me. Let's go in one more. Okay. You can smooth things out pretty significantly with this suppression slider. Now, there's this little box called Use Topaz Denoise. This box is to select the denoise type of technology. It's not going to open up Topaz Denoise or anything like that. What it is, it's just a higher technology than this regular noise suppression or this default noise suppression that we have in there. So when you click it, it's going to take longer because it's a higher technology. It's processing it much more differently, but it's a much better quality. So if you have an image that has a lot of noise coming in, definitely check this Use Topaz Denoise when you're doing your noise suppression. If you don't have a lot of noise within your image, just work with these defaults because it's much quicker, and it's for your particular image, it won't matter. You don't need a really high quality one because you don't have a lot of noise. So it's really up to you how you work with it, but I like this, the Topaz Denoise technology availability within Adjust. It's really nice. So let's reset all. Those are all the sliders. I hope that starts to make a little bit of sense to you. I'm going to go back to fit. So for this image, if I want to bring out the trees, if I want to bring out some of the colors within the mountains, because as you can see, it's just the atmospheric haze you're looking through. You're not seeing all this green and brown separation. It's all kind of blending together. And if I want to make my lake a little bit more blue, again, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to play around until I find something that really starts to give me what my ultimate goal is for this image. So some of our more, let's see here, some of our more vibrant ones are, and more popular ones actually, are Specify, Psychedelic, which is kind of crazy, and then Vibrance, which is really nice actually for this image. Here's before, here's after. Simple to get this detail coming through, a lot of color enhancement. And we also have really popular ones, HDR Pop and HDR Sketch. For this particular one it might not work, but let's play with this one. This is the HDR Sketch. So let's go into the exposure and the details first. I'm just looking at number one, the halos that are being created around these clouds that I'm really not enjoying. A little too much detail within the trees, but I'm really liking some of the colors I'm seeing. If I just want to work on the halos around here, I can take my regions down and it will start to fix that. I still get really color that's really popping. Here's before, here's after. You can also keep your regions very high and take your adaptive exposure down as well. So it's just working with those two things to work with those any halos that you start to see and don't like. Here's before, here's after. We can then go into our saturation and saturation boost and play around with that and see if we want to change those colors at all. Change the regions, etc., etc. So you have a lot of different choices in here for for manipulating your image. I like to play around. Let me show you a couple more before and afters, because I want to show you the dark and ghostly. This is a really nice one. Here's before. It's very subtle, but it really lets you see where it can come into play on images that you're not trying to get really dramatic. You just want to let some of those colors pop. So here you see your iceberg start to actually appear as blue, which is what it was on site, and some of these colors actually start to look like it did when you were there. Okay, oh, this is a nice one too. Here's before and after. That was using that HDR sketch as well. It starts to make those highlights a little bit, and those shadows come together quite nice. This is a fun one. This I started off with the ghostly night. Here's before and after. Very simple to create it by just starting off with that preset and then playing with it from there. Okay, so I'm going to start answering all these questions that come through. That's your quick intro into Topaz Adjust and all the different things that it can do for your images. I hope that this was helpful to you and you were able to apply this in your workflow. Let me take a look at some of these questions and then I will... Okay, let's start here up at the top. Philip says, yes, to work when most of these webinars are presented. Philip, I record all of them, or at least I try to record. There's been a couple mishaps along the way, but they are going to be posted at youtube.com/topazlabs, all the ones that are available at this point. I still am backed up about 5 or 6 videos, but the most recent ones are up and ready to look at. Okay. Steve says, on the sunset image, after the use of the preset, didn't the noise really increase? Actually, I'm not sure. I don't think it did, but let's take a look and see if we can solve it if it did. Okay, so it looks like it did actually quite a bit. But I didn't do any noise reduction within the program. I just did a preset. So here's before. Let's take a look at the sky. That's probably the easiest way to take a look at it. Here's before at 100%. Here's with at 100%. It honestly didn't increase from what I'm seeing right here. Here's before. Here's after. It just is more apparent. The noise didn't increase in any way, but just stretching those colors and stretching that exposure made it stand out a bit more. But the actual formation of the noise, at least on my screen, did not change at all. Now to solve this, since it was originally a noisy image, let's see if we can do that. Let's make a new background layer. Let's go into Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust, and whoa, that's kind of crazy. Let's take a look at something here that might work. I'm not sure which one I used before, but we can just start with this. Let's go 1 to 1 so we can see exactly what's going on. Here's before, which is much less noisy than this. Now if we want to process details independent of exposure, that immediately helps and takes down some of that noise. Let's watch that again. Unclicked, it's pretty noisy and it's pretty obvious noise. Here it starts to take down that noise just a little bit. Then I can come down to my noise suppression, which is at 0, and just slowly incrementally take that up, or I can even use Topaz Denoise to get a much better noise suppression quality. So there are ways to solve the noise, and just make sure you look at your image at 100%. Now here's before, here's after. The noise is actually better in the after, and I can process that back. It does take a little bit longer when you're using the Topaz Denoise to actually process the image back into Photoshop. And this is not a resized image. This is a full-sized image, a pretty large image. So it doesn't take all that long in the whole scheme of things. But that should help. And so there's always ways to solve it if it does show up as too much. So here's before. This is the original image. And here's after. The noise is better, and you have I think a more impactful image. Here's before, and here's after, something that kind of pops a little bit more. All right, I hope that helps. Let me answer a couple more questions, and then anybody who wants to stay on with me can, and I'll let the rest of you go. Okay, let's see here. All of the presets and adjusts that I was going over today, Tina Marie says, are they in there? They are. I only had 2 user-made presets, so the rest of them that you see in there are default. This is my webinar computer that you're seeing right now, so my personal one has a bunch of my personal defaults, but this one, all of those are defaults and only 2 user-made presets. Denise says, when you select I Feel Lucky, how can you tell which preset is being selected? Denise, the I Feel Lucky button actually is a random selection of the sliders within all of those adjustment sliders. So it is not actually a preset at all. So let's take a look at it one more time. So I'll leave all of these sliders open, and the I Feel Lucky just takes them in a random order, and you'll see usually within the I Feel Lucky selections that they don't look like any of the presets and the default presets that are included. They usually start to take on a whole other feeling, kind of more photo art, and they're there to give you kind of inspiration of where to begin. You can leave all the sliders like this. If you really like this dark, ghostly feeling, you can then work with that. But they aren't presets that are happening. I'm not sure how to say your name, but you said, can we apply multiple presets to an image in one session, or do I have to create another layer and apply a second preset to it? Within Adjust, some of you might have the new lens effects. In lens effects, you have a little apply button, and you can apply several effects within the one session. Within Adjust, you don't have that option at this point. This is something that we're going to be working towards, so if you request it, thank you so much. But if you come here and you like this and you say okay, and you process it back into Photoshop, you can then go back in there and do a couple of things. If you want it to be even stronger, you can just come up here to your the default filter thing up here, the last filter that you just used. Just click it again, and you won't even go back into Adjust. You'll just reapply that exact same setting, but it'll be twice as strong now. Or one thing I like to do, I like to use smart filters, and there's a few questions about that. Let's take a background copy, make a background copy. Let's get rid of this adjusted layer. Okay. Some people say, what's the benefit of working with a smart filter versus a regular layer when using Topaz products? The benefit behind it is that you're able to actually go right back into the program, have all the settings that you just applied to your copy or to your adjusted layer, and continue manipulating them. So to do that, and I'll show you a quick example here. Now that I'm on my background copy, I'm just going to go to Filter, and I'm going to say Convert for Smart Filters. And it'll give me this little message that says, to enable re-editable smart filters, the selected layer will be converted into a smart object. And you say, okay. Then you have the little icon down here that tells you it's now a smart object. Now I take that same layer into Topaz Adjust. Just to make this pretty obvious, I'm going to click on, say, Vibrance, and I'll take my adaptive exposure all the way to 1. So it's kind of crazy. I'm going to say, okay, take it back in. And let's say I was working with this image and I got to a point, that was not this insane, but, something, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's a little too strong, but I don't want to use my opacity, or I don't want to use the fade, or I don't want to do a selective adjustment. This is a great way to work with Topaz Adjust, because all you do now that you've taken it back into Photoshop, you now have a layer mask that you can work with selectively adjusting. You can do that with, you can just paint directly on this white and take out some of the effect. And to go right back into Topaz Adjust, all you do is you click it, double click it actually, and it will take the settings that you just applied to that image. Remember, we moved our adaptive exposure all the way to 1. And it will take you right back there. So now I can, let's say, oh, I need to get back down to a normal level. This makes me feel better. And I can say, okay. Get back into Photoshop. It's not even going to create a new layer or anything. It really just applied it to that same layer. So you never have to worry about over applying it or anything like that, because you can just open it right up again. So that is the advantage of working with smart layers that I have a lot of people asking about right now. But you do have to, if you're wanting to use two different types of presets, to get back to the original question, you do have to take in the image twice, the layer twice, or you can create a copy and then take that next copy in so you don't destroy that first copy that you worked with. All right, so thank you everybody for sticking with me here today. We have come up, we're running a few minutes behind, but I do want to say congratulations to M. McLaren. I don't have a little screen up to say congratulations, but I will be emailing you your free copy of Topaz Adjust. So thanks again for joining me. I'm going to stay online here for probably another 15 minutes and answer the rest of these questions that are coming through, so you're welcome to stay online. And for the rest of everybody who needs to go, thanks so much, and we'll be talking to you soon. Come join me again. Okay. Rita asks, what presets do you suggest for portraits? Let's open a portrait image. I'm sorry, I kind of was missing that here. Let's get to, I don't have one on my website, or let's go into my personal photos, or even better, let's go into my libraries. Oh, I just don't have many portraits, do I? How funny. Okay, let's open this little girl up. Okay, so for portraits, there's something called Portrait Drama, which is really nice. What it does is really take those highlights and boost them up while still retaining all of the midtones and low tones and get that contrast going a little bit more. So that's one that's really great for certain types of images. I'm not sure if it would be great for this portrait. Whatever this is does not look good on her. There we go. Okay, so Portrait Drama is right here. So it might be a fun place to start off with. This might be a little too much. So here's before and here's after. If you want to start off with it, look how crisp her eyes just became. Here's before and after. You can take down either the regions and work with them and slowly take them back up. You can take down the adaptive exposure, which starts to really go a little, stretch those highlights and lowlights. And then you can come down and work with the details as well. These small details are quite boosted right now, so if that's not something you were after, because it's really nice to have smoother skin, you can smooth that out. But it's real simple to take that in and just work with a portrait as well. I'd suggest just keeping an eye out on the skin so you don't over work the skin at all. So here's before, here's after. And if you get to something you like and it turns out to be a little too strong, again, you can just take this opacity or opacity and take that on down. So here's before and here's after. You've definitely enhanced the exposure quite a bit and made those highlights stand out, her eyes stand out, the different colors start to pull away from each other, but it still actually looks good. It doesn't over process. So here, let's look at one other one that I like to use. There's one called Portrait Smooth in here too. Where are you? There we go. Portrait Smooth is a fun one to smooth out the skin a little bit, and then you can come in here again and work with some different sliders. So this noise suppression might be something you could take down if it's a little too smooth. Try to get some detail back in to the rest here. So you can start out with any of them that just look good, but those are the two that we actually have in there that are specific to portraits, if that helps at all. Okay, let me look at a couple other questions here. I need to step away from the image, Nichole. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Let's see here. Mo says, sometimes I get nasty banding in the sky. How can I avoid or minimize that? I've found that using the little checkbox, the process independently, the details from the adjustments, that helps with that particular banding. Or if you're over suppressing the noise, you can start to get a little bit of the banding in the sky. And if you're under suppressing, so you want to get that noise reduction right on the right area. And also the adaptive exposure. Whenever you're pumping up that adaptive exposure, it's going to process very differently from one thing to the next. This is a prime example here. Here's the beginning shot here. This was processed in Topaz Adjust as one gigantic region. Okay, so this is what happens when you take the adaptive exposure up quite a bit. Regions are down to 1, and it processes it like this. Here's before, here's after. Now if I take my regions up just a little bit, it starts to even out that sky quite a bit. There's less of that white to dark blue. It's now a much more natural thing, and flattens out the rest of the tonal ranges. So you still get a significantly more popped image, but for this particular image, increasing those regions really helped. So it's just dependent upon the image and how that exposure is really affecting it. Larry asks, how does strength differ from sharpen? Okay, let's take a look at this. Is a good one to look at because this isn't a very sharp image to start off with. So let's take a look at that. Okay. The degree of detail enhancement is going to be determined by the strength slider. So let's go back to reset all. Let's do nothing to it except work with those strength, and then let's go 1 to 1. This isn't a very sharp image to start off with, so if we take the strength slider up to, let's go to 2. It's going to affect all of the details within the image. It starts to affect even the pixels within the image, so it creates a little bit more noise. It's more going to be centered on all of the details from small to large. The the sharpen slider, which works in conjunction with the threshold and the radius, it's just going to be your normal sharpening. It's going to really affect the edges more than anything else, not the rest of the details. So here's before, here's after with the sharpen. Let's take that back down. And then let's take the strength up. Here's before, here's after with the strength. So they are very similar. They are going to, especially the strength slider is going to sharpen because it's going to be enhancing those really tiny details on the edges, but it's not going to be a normal sharpening technology. It's actually focusing in on the details within the image, whereas the sharpening is going towards more of the edges. I hope that helps. Let's look at the next question here. Okay, Steve asks, why wouldn't you want to use Topaz Denoise instead of the standard defaults? Steve, that's a great question. Personally, I always use Topaz Denoise, but I'm a patient person. Sometimes denoise on really large images can be a little bit slower than you want it to be. The default slider, if you don't have a ton of noise within your image, the default suppression is going to be able to handle noise quite well. So here's before, look at all the noise in the sky, and here's after. Okay, so maybe for this image you wouldn't necessarily need the Topaz Denoise, but if you use Topaz Denoise, it is going to take a bit longer, but the technology behind the suppression is going to be better, and it's going to be a much smoother and better quality noise suppression in the end. So it really just depends on if you're interested in speed, and if you don't have a really noisy image, then there's no need to use it. If you have a really noisy image, definitely check the use Topaz Denoise and take this suppression up a lot. So here's before, here's after. Okay, let's take a look at some more here. Okay, Donette says she's not understanding the regions. Why do we need to know if the regions say 4 or 40? How does it affect how I work on my image? Okay, let's go back to fit. A very valid question here. Let's reset all, and let's just work with our exposure. Okay, so the default regions is 4. If I take my adaptive exposure up to 0.5 and my regions is at 4, this is what my image will look like. Here's before and here's after. What it's doing is that for this particular image, it's separated it into probably 12 different regions, and each region is its own box of exposure. So the adaptive exposure is working within this one region, within this one region, within the next region. So it's pulling those highlights and those lowlights all from that one region. So you have something completely different when you have, say, 16 regions versus taking this region slider all the way up to 50. Completely different look. What this did is now it's processing all of these highlights and lowlights in very, very, very small regions. It started to equalize the entire image and make it much more flat. So here's before and here's after. It's how you start to get that look of the pseudo HDR, you know, those low light or the shadows start to open up, those highlights start to really pop. And if we have any of these nasty little halos that you want to get rid of, you can do one of two things. Either take your adaptive exposure down, and if you don't want to do that, take your region slider down. Really, it's whatever works best for your image. So here's before and here's after. So that is how the region sliders start to affect how you work with your image, because they give you completely different looks, how it processes that adaptive exposure. Again, I'll send a link that goes over it much more clearly, and something you can study if you're interested. Dave asks, how am I switching between before and after? Several different ways. You can do it between, let's go ahead and hike this on up. You can do it between your spacebar. Here's before, after. You can go with your left mouse button, or you can come up here and actually click on the original and click on the preview. So there's 3 different ways. Sue asks, the building on the left of the picture looks like they are leaning to the right. Can that be fixed here? I'm guessing you're talking about this image. No, that cannot be fixed in Topaz Adjust. What it can be fixed in is Topaz Lens Effects or Photoshop. You can work with different lens adjustments within Photoshop and just kind of straighten that out if that's what you would like. Okay, Princella asks a great question. She says, what if I just want to change the color in the water? So let's maybe go back to this mountain image. I think this might be what you were talking about. So if you just want to change the water, we can do that one of a couple ways. You could, my personal favorite is just to hop into Remask, and that's just because it's simple to me. But if you don't have Remask, if you're not familiar with Remask, you can easily use Topaz Photoshop layers, and I'll show you that next. I also have a video tutorial on selective adjustments using Remask, so it's very simple. I'm just going to do this real quick so you guys can just see how you do it. Pretty much all this is doing is creating a mask for me, so I'm just going to process that back. And now, as you can see on this layer, and in my background copy 3, the only thing I have is my water. So now I can take just my water into Topaz Adjust, and I can process that back, and now it has only affected my water. Here's before. Here's after. So that is how I personally like to do it. I like to work with Remask. It just seems like a much more simple process. You are also able to, so let's take this background copy. Let's take it into Topaz Adjust. So say you just have a background copy. Say you don't have Remask and you just have Photoshop. This is a great way to do it. Let's reset all. And actually, let me go back to that because that's what I used for the last one. So I like what it's doing to the water. I don't like what it's doing to the rest. but I'm gonna, because I'm just focusing on the water, I'm gonna say okay, take it back in, and then I'm gonna use layer masks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, I should have resized these images, I'm sorry, these are right out of the camera. Okay, so I like what it's doing to the water, but not the rest of the image here. So what I'm going to do is stay on this layer that I'm at right now, come to layer, and go to layer mask, and I'm going to, let's hide all. So hiding all is going to give me a black mask over my image or whatever layer on that layer. Now I can paint with white on top of this black mask to expose the image underneath. So let's just get a white brush going here. And I'm going to keep my opacity up at 100% so you can see how obvious it is, but I'm just going to brush across my water. And obviously you'd want to be a little bit more careful, because at 100% you're going to get a really strong line. It's going to be really obvious, so you want to take your opacity level down. But that is how simple it can be within Photoshop as well. Here's before and here's after. Todd asks, is Adjust ideal for certain images? Todd, that's a great question. Adjust to me, if I have a very dark image, Adjust does amazing things for me at least. Let's take a look at, where did it go? Sorry, there it is. So when you have a really dark image, Adjust is really great to go in, just pop it in there, and quickly with the adaptive exposure you're able to pull certain things out of it. So a really dark image is ideal for Topaz Adjust. When you're trying to get an HDR type of look, or a more stylistic or stylized type of look like that, and you only have one copy of the image, you don't actually have the ability to create your own HDR or traditional HDR, then Topaz Adjust would definitely be the way to go. It's very simple, it's very easy to do. I personally like using Adjust on almost everything. I think that it's a very simple thing to use, and even on certain images, just to quickly take it in there and just click Photo Pop. Photo Pop's one of my favorites. So here's before, here's after. It's a very quick tiny bit of enhancements on all levels, on your exposure, your details, your color, and process it back, and you can very quickly turn an image that was a little muted, a little bit hazy, into something that can, so here's before, here's after. I love that photo pop because it's very subtle and it's just a quick preset. So it really depends on what kind of images you want to use it for, but I find that it's ideal for those dark images when they're really, when you can really pull something out of it. Lorraine says, use it in conjunction with Detail for a good result. Lorraine, I agree with you. Topaz Detail and Topaz Adjust together work wonderfully. James Holland asks, what is the best preset usually for outdoor senior portraits to give overall pop? James, it's kind of hard to say what the best for that would be because I don't have, without the images in front, it's kind of hard to say what look would be best for that environment that they're in. I would say with senior portraits, I would recommend definitely not ramping up those details. So make sure that the boost detail slider is at the default of 1 or lower. You can even smooth out skin by taking that boost detail slider down. That's going to take any of those really small details and kind of smooth them out. So that's helpful. So you can still get a really vibrant popping image, but you just have to go in and work with it manually, most likely, to get the best results between skin and an environment. And if you want to actually process them separately, then possibly doing selective adjustments might work well for you. Again, check out that selective adjustments video on YouTube. It's just a 15-minute quick webinar, and I actually have a really bad portrait of my family in there, of my brother and his family, and I grab them separately from the background, and that might be something that you might be interested in as well. John Nicolette has a great question. He says, do you need to have Denoise installed to use the Use Topaz Denoise option in Adjust? You do not, and that's a fabulous question. That Topaz Denoise technology is within Adjust. It's just not the default, just to help with speed, and sometimes it's not even needed. So we didn't want to make that the default noise, but it is. You do not have to have Topaz Denoise to work with that. Now, if you have Topaz Denoise, if you find that your image that you're going to bring into Adjust is super, super noisy, before you even bring it into Adjust, I would take it into Topaz Denoise program first and work with it there first before taking it into Adjust, because even though that Topaz Denoise checkbox is there for you to use with your noise suppression, it's not going to have all of the different options. It's not going to give you all of the different sliders and different ways of working with the noise, which Topaz Denoise will. It's just going to be that one slider of noise suppression. Dave asked, do you use Topaz on the layer that opens when you go to Topaz from Photoshop, or do you always create a new layer and only work on the layer? I always create a new layer, Dave. I never work on my background copy. This is just to ensure that, because, for example, this image, these images are actually from my boss's recent Italian trip. Very, very lucky. But these are directly out of the camera. You know, they are taken in from Bridge straight into Photoshop. So I don't want to manipulate this original image, because I want to be able to come back to this background image and work with it from scratch if I want. So that's why I always make these background copies. It just is less destructive, and it does take up more space, and it does take up more memory, but that's, you know, just really what works best for your system. For mine, I like to make sure that I always have a layered copy, and I always do background layers and work on with Topaz on a layer versus the original background. Jeff says he could not find the snapshot icon. Could you review where to find it? Absolutely. So let's take this original background, make a copy, come to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust 4, and the snap is going to be right up here, right below the Preview Navigator option. So it's going to be this little camera, and again, it's just as you work with your image. This looks really noisy. Actually isn't all that noisy. If you go to 100%, it becomes a little bit less. Oh, that's really noisy still. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so because everything's a little crazy, it's really noisy. So you can take a snapshot and then continue working with it. Take another snapshot, continue working with it. Snapshot. And snapshot. Let's see here. So let's do one more. Snapshot. So now I can preview or go to Previous and Next, and it will take me to all these different snapshots I just took. So it's a great way to just kind of save your settings along the way until you find the final settings that you want for your image. If you're not seeing the snap button, because I just had another, Janice says the same thing, that she's not seeing her snap button. Oh, and Chris said the same thing. Okay. Most likely you do not have the latest version of Adjust. If you have Topaz Adjust 4, but not Topaz Adjust 4.1.0, so just come down here to Menu and go to About. And this is the latest version, Topaz Adjust 4.1.0. If you're missing that snap feature, it's probably because you have 4.0.0. So just go to our downloads page. I'll include that link on the follow-up email, and you can just download it. the downloaded program, once you install it, it should automatically read your key that was already in your other adjust. So you shouldn't have to redo your key. But just in case you do, you can go to our knowledge base on the support page and go to the section that says, how do I retrieve my keys, just in case you need to retrieve them. But that is, we actually, when we did all of our bundle update, I guess it was almost, say 9, 10, 11 months ago at this point, we put that snap feature back into all of the programs. So that's probably why you're not seeing it. I didn't even think about that. So, okay, how does the threshold affect the image? Let's take one more look at that. And then I'll probably let you guys go after a couple more questions. I'm starting to get down to the end. Okay, so the larger the threshold, the more image elements are considered details. So let's take the strength slider up. It's going to, I'm going to take it all the way up just to be really obvious here. So I'm going to take this threshold slider all the way down. Okay, so right now the threshold is only considering 0.02 elements within this image as details. So that's the only thing it's actually strengthening. As you push this up, you'll start to see more and more of the larger image features, the shadowy areas, the more larger edges start to pop out. So look at this whole area right here. And granted, this is really extreme, guys, so I'm just trying to make sure that you see it on your screen. But that's at 0.25, and now we're at 0.02. Completely different look. Okay, so that is how that threshold starts to manipulate your image or affect your image. Steve says, after applying many of the adjustments, I'm seeing quite a bit of vignetting. How come? Steve, let's see here. I guess it might depend on your adaptive exposure, because that might start to manipulate your edges just a bit, especially with your regions. My suggestion to maybe get rid of the vignetting would be play with these two exposure sliders. So here's something where you see vignetting up here on the edges. This is a good example. So as that adaptive exposure went up, it's going to be stretching those colors and those values even further, and then as my region slider goes down, it'll start to be one gigantic region, which you will see affecting the highlights and the lowlights all in the same way. And then as you move those region sliders up, it will start to affect it in a much more localized way. So it looks like that vignetting might be taken care of as you push your region sliders up, and it starts to become one region within itself, these little corners. That's a very good observation. I didn't see it within this image, so that might be very helpful. And then to take care of some of those halos, you might want to take those adaptive exposure down just a little bit. So it really depends on what image you're working on, I guess. Michael says, is there a practical difference between using Topaz Denoise before using Adjust versus using Adjust and then the noise reduction in Adjust? Yes, there is a reason behind it. When you first take your image or you open your image up out of the camera, you have the details or the noise within your image at that point has not been affected by anything. That is when Topaz Denoise is going to work best. If you take your image into Adjust, it's a noisy image, if you take your image into Adjust and work with it there and then try to take it back into Denoise, Denoise is going to have a much more difficult, any noise reduction software is going to have a much more difficult time processing that noise and eliminating it without over smoothing your image. So by going first into Denoise and affecting your image noise and eliminating it there, you can then take a image that's ready to be manipulated at that point. You just don't want to sharpen or change the color or do anything to your noise until it's gone. or you want to eliminate the noise before you change the color or detail or sharpening within your image. It will help much. It'll be much easier. I hope that helps. Frank says, can we do a Denoise webinar someday? We do have the introduction to Denoise that goes over all of the different sliders within Denoise and the different preview modes and really the workflow that you're supposed to go through to work with it the best. It's a good presentation. I am the person who's presenting it, but watch out, a couple people have told me that I've been putting them to sleep with that particular presentation, but just try to stay awake because there's a lot of really good information in there. There is that, you can look at it on the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/topazlabs, or you can go to topazlabs.com/webinars as well. Let's see if I've answered everybody's. Okay, so let's see here. Oh, Don has a great question since I've been showing that snap feature so much. He says, will snap for a photo remain if you leave Topaz and return to it later for the same photo? No, it will not. So it's not like you're saving a preset. It's just within the actual session that you're in. If you get out of Topaz and you take the exact same image back in, it will not save it, unfortunately. So if you do want to save any of those snaps, you will need to save them as presets. Okay, I think I'm going to end it there. So have a lovely evening or afternoon or morning wherever you are, and thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you can take this and apply it into your Topaz Adjust workflow. Again, I'll be sending out those follow-up emails with all the information regarding the regions and all the different coupon codes that I have for you, and if you have any questions, I'll also include my email address where you can email me and ask me directly. If you want to write that down, it's webinars@topazlabs.com. So take care, and I hope to see you in an upcoming webinar about Adjust sometime this month. Bye, guys.